What is engineering? Engineering is a branch of science and technology concerned with the design, building, and use of engines, machines, and structures. Engineers use their knowledge of science and technology to fix a problem or to create something that makes life easier. As quoted by Albert Einstein, scientists investigate that which already is. Engineers create that which has never been. Today we are going to talk about the 18 most important engineering achievements of before the Common Era. Not only did these inventions change the lives of the people who lived during the time, but they also paved the way for many other things that we still use today. The first signs of engineering appeared about 3.3 million years ago in Eastern Africa. This was during the time of the Homo habilis. These tools were usually made of hard, water-worn creek cobbles that were made of volcanic rock. One side had several flakes knocked off by using another stone as a hammer. This made a jagged chopping object that fit easily into the hand. Humans were first able to control fire around 400,000 B.C.E. Most likely, they created the fire by rubbing sticks together. As time went on, fire became an essential part of people's lives. Not only did it allow them to cook their food, but it also allowed them to create tools that would help them with everyday things. The oldest known boat was built around 8000 BCE, but there is a lot of evidence to show that boats might have been in existence as far back as 40,000 BCE. Migrants spread to most of the major islands between Africa and Australia, which means they would have to travel through the ocean. At the time, the only way to get there was by using a boat. These boats were probably just simple bamboo rafts, which later evolved into the dugout canoe, which is seen in this picture. The oldest known pieces of pottery are clay figurines found in the Czech Republic. These figurines date from 29,000 to 25,000 BCE. It is thought that people first began using pottery as vessels for containing food and water about 13,000 years ago in Japan. These pots were made by building and smoothing coils of clay until the wanted size and shape was achieved. The pot was then fired in an open fire. Making these pots was very hard because the potter had to constantly walk around and make sure the pot was even on each side. It would be easier if the pot could be made to turn. This problem was solved in Mesopotamia, but we will talk about that invention later. Megaliths, or big stones, were used to build monuments from 4500 to 1000 BCE. The most common type of megalithic structure is called the dolmen. The dolmen is made from vertical supports with a flat capstone on the top. These capstones can be over 100 tons. There are many ideas on how these things were built. One theory is that the stones were hauled up earth ramps. Another theory is that they were levered upwards, lifting one side a few inches and then chalking it with timbers, and then doing the same on the other side. The plow is one of the most important agricultural tools ever created. It helps break up and oxygenate soil so you can plant crops, fertilize them, and take care of weeds. Before the plow, people used a sharpened branch to break up the soil before planting. Later, handles were added to make it easier to push the branch through the soil. Around 6000 BCE, the domestication of the ox in Mesopotamia created a new source of power for working the fields. The ard was the first design. It was the same branch used previously, fastened to a yoke that could be attached to the ox. This design was only useful for light, sandy soil. This design was replaced by the iron plow around 1000 BCE. Copper takes about 2000 degrees Fahrenheit to fully melt. No open fire can get that hot, so to reach that temperature, you need to force the fire. Early metal workers used a leather tube with a clay nozzle to blow air into the base of the fire. When more oxygen is added, the fire burns hotter. This concept was later used to create forges that could melt things like iron. The people of Mesopotamia and Turkey are said to have been the first to smelt copper. They introduced this process to the Egyptians, who used it to create copper tools, cookware, dishes, and even mirrors. The oldest known wheel was found in Mesopotamia, and it dates back to around 3500 BCE. The first wheels weren't actually used for transportation. Instead, they were used as a potter's wheel, and this solved the problem we discussed earlier. It wasn't until 300 years later that people began using the wheel for transportational purposes. Copper is a soft metal, good for jewelry, but not for tools or weapons. When mixed with tin in a ratio of about 9:1, it created tougher alloy, bronze. Bronze is much stronger than copper or tin alone, and it can be formed into a cutting edge. It is also easier to melt than copper, so it is easier to cast into molds. Bronze was widely used between 3200 and 1200 BCE. This period is called the Bronze Age. Around 3000 BCE, Egyptians started to measure boundaries of fields. They did this by stretching a rope with equally spaced knots and then counting these knots. The corners were plotted using a triangle made of ropes which had 3, 4, and 5 knots on each side. These numbers are now known as Pythagorean triples, which will always give you a right-angled triangle. The first ziggurats were built in Mesopotamia around 2800 BCE. Ziggurats are huge step temples made of brick. There are around 25 ziggurats known today, and none of them have survived to their original height. The largest ziggurat still standing is in Chogha-Zanbil, Iran, which is 105 meters tall and 24 meters wide. Its height today is probably half of its original. The first pyramid ever created was the Step Pyramid of Djoser, built in 2648 BCE. This structure was built for the pharaoh Djoser and was designed by Imhotep, Djoser's vizier. Imhotep was a doctor, sage, architect, astronomer, and high priest. Imhotep was also the world's first known engineer. This pyramid was originally a flat-roofed monument with sloped sides. After many expansions, it evolved into a 62-meter-tall pyramid. This pyramid was built using an astonishing 11.6 million cubic feet of clay and stone. There are also tunnels underneath the pyramid that stretch through a labyrinth that is 5.5 kilometers in length. The labyrinth connects to a central shaft that is 7 meters squared and 28 meters deep. At the bottom lies the tomb of King Djoser. One of the greatest Roman achievements was the arch. Romans used the arch in bridges, aqueducts, and large buildings like the Colosseum, which had 240 arches over 3 floors. Arches have an advantage over lintels, horizontal beams, because they direct the weight of the object on them sideways. A flat lintel will crack under so much force. Around 1200 BCE, multiple discoveries sent us into a new age of metal, the Iron Age. First, charcoal was used as fuel, then bellows were invented which increased the amount of oxygen in the fire. This allowed the temperature to get up to 2800 degrees Fahrenheit, the melting point of iron. Iron is the 4th most common element on Earth, and it overtook bronze because it was easier to mass produce. As furnaces improved, so did the quality of the iron, which is stronger and harder than bronze. The Cloaca Maxima, meaning greatest drain, was the ancient world's largest sewer. Wastewater from Roman bathhouses, latrines, fountains, and public buildings, as well as rainwater runoff from roads, all flowed into the Cloaca Maxima. The tunnel of the sewer ran for 900 meters and was 4.5 meters wide and 3.7 meters tall. The tunnel was covered by a vaulted roof made of limestone, and arches were inserted every 4 meters or so. The Cloaca Maxima drained into the Tiber River, which sometimes flooded back into it, but the structure held its ground. Today, only a slight trickle of water flows through this sewer, with its outfall running near the Ponte Roto Bridge. The Temple of the Parthenon, standing on the Acropolis, was built in 432 BCE. The Acropolis Hill covers 7.5 acres and rises 150 meters above the city of Athens. The Parthenon was built as part of a project to rebuild the Acropolis after an attack by the Persians in 480 BCE. Sophisticated building techniques, such as making the columns lean inward slightly to make them seem straight from far away, were used in this building. Around 400 BCE, Persians developed the yakhal, which is Persian for ice pit. This was a domed structure with underground storage on the inside. The walls were at least 2 meters thick at the base and were made of mud brick. This mud brick was coated with a mixture of sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash. This gave the dome excellent insulation, but it also made it waterproof. In winter, water from a cannon irrigation system was fed into channels and allowed to freeze overnight. The ice was then cut up and stored in the yakhal. The dome shape of the yakhal helped keep the ice cool. Warm air rose up inside the dome and then came out through vents at the top. The yakhal allowed people to store perishable foods such as meats for longer periods of time. It also introduced the shabat, a sweet, fruit-flavored chilled drink. Around 300 BCE, Greek and Roman engineers created the water wheel as a source of power for other machines. The rotation of the water wheel is transmitted to the axle, which also spins. This motion is used to drive things like mills, pumps, and spinning machines. There are 2 types of water wheel designs, vertical and horizontal. Horizontal water wheels are useful in areas where there are steep slopes with fast running water, like mountain streams. But these water wheels aren't very efficient. They convert only 15 to 30% of the kinetic energy of the water flow into usable energy. There are 2 types of vertical water wheels, the undershot and the overshot. In the undershot wheel, the lower part of the wheel is submerged in the water. The overshot wheel has a channel, called a pen trough, that directs the water so that it falls on top of the wheel. The overshot wheel has an efficiency of about 60%, which makes it far more efficient than the undershot or horizontal wheel.